Welcome to the RICO 12 Speaker Meeting podcast. My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of this meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to RICO 12. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food, and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the difference and the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of the speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, go to RICO12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions. So if you choose to contribute, you can go to RICO12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal that I'll have in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes in the podcast. When you contribute, please specify which meeting number it is. And this one is meeting number 78. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce today's guest speaker. It's Tony S., whose topic is how addiction swapped in recovery. And Tony is joining us from New Zealand. This is our first time on the in the Southern Hemisphere, and we're really grateful for that. Now I'm going to do a little guest intro and bio, and this is in Tony's own words. Tony says, I came into Alcoholics Anonymous in a very dark state in 1989. And while I was grateful when the craving to drink and drug was removed by a power greater than me, the obsession to eat, I'd been battling all my life, got more powerful by the day. I continued to eat addictively and, as a result, didn't experience the freedoms of AA's promises. Also, sponsoring myself for 8 years didn't help in that manner. In a Paris hotel in 2002, after a deeply shameful episode, I finally accepted I was as powerless over food as I was over alcohol, and that I must seek help from sober members following the principles now practiced by Addictive Eaters Anonymous, AEA. Since getting a real sponsor and starting to work the steps, I haven't had to eat addictively or use any mind-altering substance, and my life continues to get better by the day. Take it away, Tony. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Thanks for the welcome. My name's Tony. I'm an addictive eater from Addictive Eaters Anonymous and also a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I guess my story basically is not a lot different to a lot of other addicts. I believe I was born an addict. There's addiction in my family history. And basically I grew up, sort of feeling the way that the bedevilments in the big book on page 54, the Alcoholics Anonymous big book, set out. I was sort of, prone to misery and depression, just full of fear, anxiety, feeling of uselessness. And food was the first thing that took the edge off that. So it was the first substance that made me feel better than I did. And I ate addictively right from the outset. I was the type of kid that, slapped the hand of another kid at a party to get the last cake on the plate. I ate food out of trash cans. I stole food. I ate burnt food. Basically, I used to make a joke that I was on a seafood diet. If I saw food, I ate it. And a lot of that time, I didn't want to eat the way I did because I knew it was different to my friends, but I couldn't stop. I just could not stop. So, and then in my mid-teens, I discovered alcohol, and so I had two substances on the go. I was never an alcoholic who didn't eat, and as soon as I got drunk for the first time, I thought I'd found the solution, and so I pursued those two things, as the sort of primary focus of my life for for the next decade and a half. And I always associated my problem with weight, and I was never an overweight kid. I was a guy who played a lot of sport, and that helped keep the weight off, because I was eating huge volumes of food right from an early age. My nickname at home was Harry Hollow Legs, because I could just put away enormous amounts of food, but when I started drinking, I then started to lose the motivation to train for my sports, and I started to put on weight, and I didn't like that. So between leaving kind of high school and going on to a tertiary college, in a year, I put on between 4 to 5 stones of weight, and I went from being a schoolboy athlete to being a slob, and I was full of self-loathing and just depression. I just felt really bad, but I couldn't stop. So my only solution to that was booze, food, and marijuana. And I was the type of addict that sort of rigorously sought the geographical cure. I moved from place to place, always thinking, fresh start here, it'll be better. And my record was 4 cities, 4 jobs in 1 calendar year. But I was always taking the problem with me. The problem wasn't, the place, or the problem, basically, as it says in the big book, wasn't actually the substance neither. It was the disease of addiction in me. And so, it might be better in a new place for a couple of weeks, but I would soon revert to the way I always was. And once I got that mental obsession for whatever the substance was, there was a craving beyond my control. I had to have it. I had to do it. And I remember at times lining up in a cafe with all this food on my plate, knowing that I was going to hate myself for eating it, but being totally unable to stop, totally unable to leave that food there or leave that queue. And, so I started to go to weight loss organizations. I started to, go jogging again, gyms, thinking the problem was weight. I've since found that wasn't the problem. That was a symptom of the problem. And so as I said, I moved around a lot, and I moved back to my hometown, my home city in New Zealand, and I saw an advertisement in the newspaper for a food fellowship, and I was writing for the newspaper at the time, and I thought it would make a great story. But what I now believe it was my higher power directing me to that advertisement. That because I saw that in the newspaper, it was only a small classified ad, but it sort of jumped out. It was like it was in 120 point. I'd see it there, and it was almost like it was a neon sign. And so eventually I wrote to the organisation, which we had to do in those days, and they said, "Oh, come along to a meeting. It might be the best way to see how we work." And so I went to my first meeting straight from the bar, and so it was a little bit foggy, but I was amazed. I heard people there talking about being obsessed with food, unable to stop eating, and there were a handful, maybe 2 or 3, who said that they'd found a freedom from the obsession to eat. And so I ended up writing an article on the organisation, and I met a woman in recovery who was a little bit older than me, probably mid-20s. It was like I'd found my sort of sister separated at birth, if you like. She around food, alcohol, drugs, and just those basic bedevilments. Her story was uncannily like mine, and she was free of all that. But I was in my mid-20s. I didn't think she and another member of that fellowship came and 12-stepped me and said that if I wanted to get well, I'd have to give up drinking, drugging, and eating addictively. And I just couldn't imagine in my mid-20s the rest of my life without those things. To me, they were the things that were keeping me going. I mean, my marriage was rocky. I was in conflict in every area of my life, but I felt I needed those things to survive. Without those, I could not cope with life. And so I said thanks, but no thanks, and went on my not so merry way for another little while, and did another geographical, went to another city. Thought it'd be great there. It was for about 5 minutes, and to cut a long story short, my drinking really took off, and at the end of my drinking, everything was black and bleak, and I wasn't suicidal, but I had this sense of impending doom. And fortunately, a friend of mine had got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and when things got bad enough for me, I turned to her. And not long before that, I'd fallen out of a stationary bus on a booze crawl, split my head open, and was covered in blood, and insisted that the driver drive me not to the hospital to get stitched, but to the nearest nightclub. And then next day I got up and I managed to get myself down to the doctor, got stitches in my head, and went back drinking with the people I'd been drinking with the night before. So I didn't have any problem with the insanity of the disease when I came to AA. And after a real struggle in AA initially, the desire to drink was removed, which was a miracle. But I remember going to a treatment centre, in terms of addiction swapping, which is really, my topic today. I went to a treatment centre for alcoholism, and I knew there that I was just as addicted to food. And I tried to go on what they called the pleasantly plump diet. And that worked for a few days, but the craving to eat was so strong that I would be running out of that treatment centre down to the village to the to the takeaway shop or the cafe to get food, because as we were working the program and things were coming up, it was too tough for me to deal with it without a substance, and I couldn't get alcohol and drugs. And one night at treatment centre, I woke up in the middle of the night intending to raid the kitchen. And I met a night nurse who, talked to me a little bit about food addiction. But at that stage, I just didn't want to give it up. That was, I was still trying to control it. And so I stayed in AA for 13 years without really being able to work on the steps beyond the first half of the first step. And I was watching people who came into AA with me being rocketed into that fourth dimension that it talks about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Their lives were getting better. My life materially wasn't bad, but internally, in terms of mentally, emotionally, whatever, spiritually, because that was my malady. It was a spiritual malady all along. But it says in the big book on page 23 that the main problem with the alcoholic centers in the mind. And that's certainly true in my case. I thought that was the obsession with booze, and it is, but it's also my thinking. That is where the problem is. And somewhere along the line, after another geographical move in recovery, I came back to my hometown again, and I made the fateful decision that I'd had a few good sponsors, and I was 6 years in AA now, so I could sponsor myself. And that was an absolute disaster. I can honestly say I am the worst sponsor I've ever had, because in that time I was sponsoring myself for 8 years. I separated from my wife. I was in conflict in every area of my life still, and I was negative, depressed. Not in the clinical sense, but more in what I've heard described as, an excessive involvement with self. I was totally self-centered still, apart from my love for my kids. But beyond that, it was all about me, and so on the outside, I had a glamorous job in which I was traveling around the country and the world. Job I'd always dreamed of doing. It all looked good, 2 cars in the garage, whatever, the house. Only due really to the prudent management of my, now ex-wife. But it looked like I had it together on the outside, but inside I was a mess. I was just a total mess. And, I was in AA purporting to be sober. And so what happened basically was I was, as I said, I was traveling a fair bit overseas with my job, and I ended up in Paris, which is, a city I really enjoyed, but my eating was so bad, like I was in these sort of hotels around Europe, and I'd be the first one down to breakfast in the morning. It was like an all-you-could-eat breakfast, and I would take all the daily newspapers with me, and I'd sit there at breakfast for the full 2-hour period, just gorging myself, reading these newspapers, and then kidding myself that I wouldn't need to eat for the rest of the day because I'd had a good breakfast, And within an hour, I was eating again. So I just kept eating right through the day. I'd stop weighing myself, but I was, 20 stone plus, I would imagine at the time. And I was miserable. And I was a single, separated man in Europe, and I fell for the oldest trick in the world, which was a bar scam. I met a woman in the street. She took me to a bar. I had 2 cans of Coca-Cola, and she had a couple of bottles of wine, and I got a bill for €600, and I freaked out completely. I had to pay this bill with my company credit card to get out of there safely because there were, guys ringing every exit. And I got back to my hotel, and I was just in this great sense of shame and guilt, and I sat down on my bed in the room, and I just had this overwhelming sense that I was as addicted to food and as powerless over food as I had been with alcohol, and that I needed to get back to those people in recovery from addictive eating, when I went back home. Because I'd been in and out of their meetings for a while, but I tried to avoid the people in recovery. I literally tried to avoid them. I'd see some of them at AA, and I'd leave the AA meeting just before the end so I didn't have to talk to them because it was too confronting. I knew I was still in active addiction, but I didn't want to give up at that stage. But in that hotel room, I just had that sense that it was over. I couldn't do it. And so I went home and I sought those people out. And it took me a little while still to give up the idea that I could do it myself. So maybe a couple of months later, I found myself going up to one of the women I'd met 17 years before at my very first meeting when I went along as a reporter. And she'd been round to my house on a 12-step call. And I said to her, how did she think it would work if I, kept my main sponsor in AA and got a food sponsor in that fellowship? And she just looked at me and said, knowing you, Tony, that would not work at all. And she wheeled away. And the following week, I couldn't wait for the meeting to end to go up and ask her to help me. And I don't remember planning to do that. I just remember at the end of the meeting having this feeling, I need to ask for help. And so I went up and asked for help. And next day, I was given a food plan to follow, directions around working the steps, attending meetings. I had a plan of recovery to follow, and I was told the answer is not in the food plan. The answer is in surrender, and I believe that's what I did when I went up and asked for help, because I'd always vowed I was never going to get a sponsor in that fellowship. When I went up and asked for help, I believe that was the first step of surrender. I was opening the door to my higher power, to God, to do for me what I cannot do for myself. And I think God needed to see me do that, to reach out and humble myself to somebody else, to show that I was serious, or as we say in this part of the world, fair dinkum about getting well. It was the the first wee step of the first step, if you like. So, and since that day, I haven't had to eat addictively. I haven't had to, no matter good and bad. I mean, very happily, I've remarried, and when we got married on our wedding night, I was still able to eat to my food plan, through the help of a sponsor and through God doing for me what I can't do for myself. So, life is so much better. And I was also gifted, I believe, a beginner's mind. I forgot how long I'd been in AA, and I thought, right, you're a newcomer in this fellowship, head down, step one, act like a newcomer. And so I was able to work through the steps meaningfully for the first time, despite 13 years of attendance at AA. And when I got to the fourth step, that's what convinced me that I was still in active addiction all those years, because there was a lot of things on my fourth step, a lot of wrongs that I'd done while I was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, not to AA members, but to other people in my life. And it really pulled me up short. I looked at that and I thought, I haven't been clean and sober all that time. I've been dry. I've been abstinent from alcohol, and don't get me wrong, I'm so grateful for that, because to AA for that, because I'd be dead if I kept drinking. I have no doubt about that. But in terms of sobriety as I know it today, I wasn't sober all the time I was eating, because while I had a belief in a power greater than me, the channel was blocked with food. And so I can see very clearly that addiction was swapping from one substance to the other. I always had the food and the alcohol, but once the alcohol went down, the food got worse, because that's all I had left. And through working those steps, I've been able to go out and make amends to people that I'd harmed, 30, 40 years ago. Because when I first did a fourth and fifth step in a treatment centre, I skipped over those people because I felt that they'd harmed me. It was all about me. So the longer I go, the more I see that the disease is around, like it's true what it says in the big book: selfishness, self-centeredness. That is the root of my problem. And so what I try to do today is be of maximum service to men who are addictive eaters, and to people in AA who may have my experience of struggling with another substance while in recovery from alcoholism. Because I don't think I used to think I was terminally unique, but I don't think I am in that regard. It's quite uncanny. But my life has just got so much better. Clean and sober. I'm not somebody that says I'm X years sober in AA and X years in Addictive Eaters Anonymous. I take my recovery from when the last substance kind of went down. So because that is my experience. I'm not saying that should be the experience of everyone, but for me that feels right, because it feels like I've had, well, two lives, maybe three. The life of full-on addiction, the life of kind of, if you like, half-baked recovery in AA, and the life of sobriety now in Addictive Eaters Anonymous. So in Addictive Eaters Anonymous, we're patterned on the AA program. The AA program is the kind of bedrock of our program too. And we have a sobriety statement whereby, and it really suits me, whereby we seek to be free of addictive eating and or mind-altering substances. So I'm a little bit like that guy in the big book called, there's a story, it used to be called Dr. Alcoholic Addict, and I think it's now Acceptance was the answer. And he talks about, he'd used up the right to all chemical peace of mind. And that's me, like I have to live, free of any substance. I have to be in AEA and AA. I'm still a very active member of AA and very grateful to it. and I have to basically try and help another to achieve sobriety, and that's keep working the steps. It's it's kind of chalk and cheese for me now. I look back on all those years in AA, and it says we do not regret the past. I wish that I had kept coming to the meetings with the AEA people from the outset, but I can't change that. My story is my story, and I had to go through what I did to get to where I am now. And life is so much better. I mean, as I said, I'm happily remarried. I have grown-up children, grandchildren. I'm still I've been in the same job for 27 years. Amazing. Like from somebody who had 4 jobs in 4 cities in one year once. My employers still trust me to travel. They know they get a good day's work out of me. I'm able to be of service in some other areas of my life, but primarily I've got to keep my feet firmly planted in AEA and AA and help another alcoholic and addictive eater. That's pretty much what it is. It's my primary purpose. So all I could do really was encourage anybody in recovery or in recovery meetings who feel that they're struggling to perhaps look searchingly and fearlessly at what else might be going on, and if there is, to reach out. So anyone with a problem with food, please contact AEA. We have a great website, aea.org, and it's full of people's stories, and not unlike mine. So it's been really good to be here with you, Justin, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tony. I really appreciate and really resonate with a lot of your story. I appreciate you being willing to share that and to share a little bit about your fellowship AEA and also AA and how they help you. Thank you for doing that. Now we have time to open up this meeting to questions from those who are attending, and I've also written down some questions. If you have a question for Tony, please type it in the Q&A section down there at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other. And I will read those questions as they come in. But I'm going to start out with a question that I have for you, Tony, that this weighs heavy on me. And I think this is my justifying mind in trying to do some justification here. So food is one of the very, very few things absolutely necessary for life. How do you avoid triggering the obsession and allergy while staying alive, while still fueling your body?
Well, you just hit on the key. Fueling the body is the key. So I have a plan of eating that I've accepted from a sponsor, based on sound nutritional principles, and so that's my plan of eating for the day. I write that out in the evening, and that's what I have the next day. If I were to have anything off that plan, if I were to add anything or subtract anything, that to me would be like picking up the first drink. It would be, I would be off my food plan, and therefore, I would be, I would not be sober. So, and it sounds, like for years I thought that sort of thing was, was a restriction, and this sort of shows basically what I said before about the problem being centered in the mind. So, for years I dismissed that as too controlling, too tough, but when I had contempt prior to investigation, like it says in the big book. I hadn't actually done it, but I dismissed it. When I started to do it and follow it, I found it was the opposite. I found it was a freedom, and it still remains a freedom today. It's just to wake up in the morning without the obsession to eat or drink or drug. What a freedom that is! It's a God-given freedom. So that essentially, I think, answers the question. Yes, we need to fuel our body. but I have a plan of eating, which is my sobriety bottom line, if you like.
Thank you for sharing that. And I will have a couple of follow-up questions to that kind of, and also to something that you said towards the end of your share. But I had a question come in from Leonard. Leonard says, my primary addiction is lust. I am addicted, recovering to that. I think I'm also a food addict, yet at times I have lost 80 pounds and 45 pounds, but I go back to it. So I feel like I can decide to stop. So I wonder if it is really an addiction or not. What are your thoughts on that, Tony?
Well, I can only go from my own experience. Absolutely, it's an addiction in my case. I mean, I was able to stop for a few days too at times, but the mental obsession, just built up like water behind the dam, and eventually the dam bursts and whoosh, straight back into it. So, I would lose weight. Never really got down to a kind of a goal weight, as they used to say in weight loss organisations. But I was looking a lot better, and I remember one day I lost a lot of weight over a winter, and it was the first day of the football season, and I went to watch a game, and I saw a friend there or an associate there, and they were remarking on my weight loss. That when I was talking to him, all I could see was somebody walking past with a hot dog and the sauce sort of streaming down it. I knew I couldn't wait for that conversation to end to get to the hot dog stand. And I had one hot dog, and I had another, and before long I'd put on all the weight I'd lost and more. So I could stay stopped for a little while, but I could never guarantee I would stay stopped. So in my case, I have no doubt. In my case, it's an addiction. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Tony. So towards the end of your share, you talked a little bit about how you had been abstinent or dry from alcohol for a lot of years, and yet not in recovery. Can you kind of describe to us how you define abstinence, sobriety, and recovery today for yourself?
Well, pretty much, today, abstinence is not really a term I use, apart from in that context that I was dry. I was if you like, a dry drunk. I was still an active addiction, but I wasn't drinking, and I'm grateful for that, because the way I drank, the way I drove drunk, the way I got into fights, I'd probably be dead now. So, my definition is basically the definition of Addictive Eaters Anonymous, about that I'm free of addictive eating and all mind-altering substances. So, I've had a problem with pills too over my life. Prior to coming to AA. So that's an area I have to be very wary of too. So I don't take anything that isn't kind of genuinely medically prescribed, and I certainly don't take anything without discussing it with my sponsor. I went from sponsoring myself to experiencing true sponsorship, and that's a world apart. It's much better to have the direction of another member in recovery. And so my basic definition for me is freedom from addictive eating, which means eating to that plan of eating that I described earlier, and all mind-altering substances.
Thank you. So, Tony, you talked of you shared of the obsession being removed, both from alcohol and also from addictive eating. Do you mind sharing a little bit of the detail of how that happened, how that obsession was removed from your life? Is that something you're willing to share with us?
Yeah, sure. It was quite a long process in AA. I wasn't one of those people who, the obsession was removed instantly. I basically white knuckled it for a couple of years in AA. I'd gone from being kind of like a barroom regular to somebody who couldn't go to bars I tried to go socially for a little while, but I just couldn't. I just resented people drinking. I had the craving so strong. Once I actually ordered a drink at the bar, and fortunately a friend who knew I was coming to AA stopped me. And my sponsor said, look, if you're going to keep going to those places, it's a bit like if you sit in a barber's chair long enough, you'll get a haircut. And he said to me, you can't afford too many haircuts, and so I had to stay away. And I remember driving to my home group meeting. I had to drive down this main road, and there was a brewery there with a foaming glass of beer, as a sign outside. And when I drove there, I had to either go the back way to avoid it or look away as I went past, because there was still quite a part of me that wanted to drink. So it took a while. How was it removed? God job, just eventually I realized that I no longer had that desire to drink. Maybe it was a result of doing a sort of half-baked fourth step at a treatment centre. I don't know, but eventually after a couple of years, the desire to drink was removed. But I think I had a soft landing because I still had the food. I've never tried to judge people who in and out of alcohol who kind of, if you like, slip or relapse in AA. That would have been me, but for the food. I had the food I could go to. That was my go-to substance. And so that softened the blow. I'm no longer having alcohol and marijuana in my life. But in terms of my mind, I have an addictive mind. So when I came to AA, I knew I couldn't drink. I knew I was at death's door with alcohol. But my mind switched back to, well, you can start smoking pot again. I'd given up when a friend got busted. I just couldn't be bothered with the hassle because I had alcohol and food. That's how I could give that up. But so I planned how I would buy marijuana, how I'd hide the money from my wife. And I blurted out to my sponsor one day, and he said, look, that's just like drinking. You can't do that. But I never spoke to him about the food, or he kind of dismissed food. And, I know I never got drunk on food, but I did. Feelings were very similar actually. By the time I came to AEA, like I said, I'd gone from somebody who never wanted help to asking for help. It was amazing. Like the day that I asked for help, I was still obsessing about food, how not to eat it. When I asked for help and started following the food plan, the obsession was removed quite quickly. It was like, to me, it's a process of surrender, and that was a big part of surrender for me, was asking for help and agreeing to follow the directions of another person in recovery with a lot of experience, and forgetting how long I've been in AA, because I used to go to meetings of food fellowships and tell them how to work the AA steps, and then leave and go to the shop and start eating. So I forgot how long I've been around and just started with, developing a newcomer's mind, if you like. It was a great place to be. So that happened quite quickly for me, but AA was a battle. Yeah. So
thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate the compare and contrast between the two. That's a big deal. Now, you mentioned surrender. And one of the big questions that I get from people in my fellowship is, how do I surrender? I get the process, I get the word, I understand it, but it just doesn't click with me. So what is your process of surrender as that comes up in your day-to-day or week-to-week life? How do you go about surrendering?
Trying to connect with my higher power, sometimes that's a deeper process than others. It's I can like anyone, I can get caught up in what's going on in my life, particularly my work life. But I try to stay in touch with my higher power through meditation, prayer, stay in touch with my sponsor, go to lots of meetings, try to connect with other people in recovery, and help someone else. A big part of it is like getting out of self. Is it says in the big book several times. When all else fails, work with another alcoholic. And that's so true. But basically, I believe God's always with me. I just need to make the effort to connect. And these days it's a bit more, it was very formal to start with, but these days it's a bit more kind of intuitive, if you like.
Yeah, I hear people talk about that, when it's time to reach out to somebody else. I've connected with God, I've gone through this process, and yet I still am feeling the tug, and I really want to go and, act out in whatever my addiction may be. And they talk about the 1,000-pound phone, trying to pick it up to talk to somebody else. Did you have a moment when, or, a series of moments when it became clear to you, or it became easier to you in order to connect with others, to help others? Like you mentioned, nothing helps an alcoholic better than helping another alcoholic. Did you have a moment of time that kind of clicked for you?
I guess that kind of just evolved from seeing the experience of other people doing that. And, like I often say that if I live for another 50 years, which is probably anatomically impossible, that I couldn't hope to repay the kind of, the gifts given to me by other people in recovery. And, it talks about the prodigies of service. And, I see my sponsor spending countless hours, talking with other addictive eaters. And that's quite inspiring in itself to see that. Pretty much sort of seeing the experience of other people. And like, it sounds corny to say this outside recovery circles, but nothing beats seeing someone come in and get well. I mean, nothing I ate or drank or anything I ingested beats the feeling of seeing somebody come into a meeting broken, stay, work the 12 steps, get sober, obviously, and get well, and then they start, and to see them, start helping others. It's great. There wasn't any one particular moment, but it was more the the example shown by other people, who had sort of basically laid the path to follow. And Dr. Bob talks in the big book about there were 4 reasons why he was so willing to help others, and one of them was it kept him sober, obviously. And and I can't off the top of my head remember all 4, but another important one was, in doing so, he felt that he was repaying what other people had done for him. And that's true. So it's never a hardship. I mean, no matter what's going on in my life, I might be super busy at work or with my wife or grandkids. A call from another addictive eater or alcoholic is a bright spot of the day, no question.
I agree, and I also love seeing the light come on in a fellow's eyes, that all of a sudden they get it just for today, and then if they get it for tomorrow and the next day, I no greater pleasure have I ever had. It's an awesome thing. Thank you for sharing your experience with that. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your window. We're going to have a couple more here, and then we'll start wrapping up. But Tony, before we get to a final question or two, do you have any words of wisdom or an experience that you'd like to share with us that may help us in our own paths and journeys in recovery?
If anyone feels that they're struggling in recovery, or while attending the 12-step fellowship and trying to work steps, then talk with one sponsor first, but have a searching and fearless look at where they are. I mean, for years I knew that I had a problem with food, for years in AA, I knew that, but I was too proud and too arrogant and too kind of full of myself to go back to the people who were in recovery from that, and ask for help. So, asking for help. I mean, it's, I someone say once that and thank you, basically, and that's true. But I believe strongly that the reason I'm not eating and drinking and drugging today is due to God. The power greater than me that I choose to call God. Still don't totally understand, but it works for me. But I believe that to access God, to access God's help, I had to actually reach out to another person in recovery. And I don't like offering advice, but just my experience is in doing that. That was the turning point. That was the key to what followed later. So that was a huge part of that surrender. And today I find surrender really being just doing what's suggested, and contrary to my own thinking, because that's the problem. My first sponsor in AA used to tap his head, which was as bald as mine, and he'd say, the top bit's the enemy. And so it's the thinking. So as long as I don't overthink and just keep doing what I'm doing, life just keeps getting better. I guess I touched on pride. That was the big stumbling block. Pride could have killed me. I was too proud to admit that after all those years in AA, I was struggling. But once I did admit that, it was such a relief. It was such a gift to be able to, just think like a newcomer and start following my sponsors' suggestions based on over 20 years of sobriety.
It's awesome. And I do love that phrase that you said it was your sponsor said, the top bit's the enemy. That's something that I'm going to write that on my wall of phrases and quotes that I've pulled from this speaker meeting over the last year and a half that I've been doing it. And I love it. I think we're about ready to close out unless you've got anything else that you'd like to say, Tony. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we close this meeting?
I think specifically as I mentioned before, the AEA website, Addictive Eaters Anonymous, is literally addictiveeatersanonymous.org, one word. So if anyone has any concerns about their eating, please go to the website, and there's a lot of information there, and there's also details about meetings. So I'd encourage people to come to meetings, and there's contact information there. So I can only go on my own experience, and it's really changed my life. Admitting I was as powerless over food as I was over alcohol, and keeping my feet firmly in both fellowships, and which is why I said earlier, I like to be able to help people as men struggling with addictive eating. So it's the best help I've found. So it's worked for me, and I'd encourage anyone who had any concerns about their eating to set aside the contempt prior to investigation and go to the website.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tony. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up there. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you have not yet rated and reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It really is a great way to work our Step 12 in sharing this message with others. And next week, I'm excited to be going back to New Zealand again. We'll be hearing from Leonie T, also from New Zealand, whose topic will be a new way of living. And I'm really looking forward to it. So to close out this meeting, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the Serenity Prayer that Tony has chosen and will be leading us in.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Tony. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
deep of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of